No one should buy a Series S. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Steer away from the Series S. You're basically getting a last-gen console if you do.
Hello guys and welcome to the Everyday Unboxer. I've been watching endless videos on YouTube where they're criticizing the Xbox Series S and they're just roasting it. And I don't understand why they're doing that, because all the criticism that I've heard, it's not completely accurate. I've heard that the Xbox Series S, it's not a next-gen console, that, it's the Xbox One X, masked as a next-gen console, which is completely untrue. This is a next-gen console, not only because of the SSD that it has and the features that brings in itself, such as no loading times, etc., etc. You get 120 FPS. It is true that you get 120 FPS at 1080p most of the time, and in most games, you won't get 120 FPS at 2K or 4K. But that is up to the developers of the games to actually implement that 1440p resolution at 120 FPS. That's not up to Microsoft, up to Xbox to do that. It's up to the developers to make that happen. So when I hear everyone saying, it is a 1080p, etc., etc., well, it is at 120 FPS. If you play at 60 FPS on most games, on most AAA games, you're going to be able to play at 1440p, and you're going to be able to upscale that to 4K. So the upscaling, to be honest, is not something that the everyday, average person will notice. You won't notice that it's upscaling from 2K up to 4K. I'm not able to tell the difference. I have a 4K TV and I play some games on 4K, some on 120 FPS at 1080p. And the games that I play in 4K, I'm not able to tell the difference. I can't, my eye doesn't, recognize that I'm playing at 2K upscaled to 4K. And you do have HDR. So it's not like you're playing 4K and you're missing on some of the goodness that 4K brings. You are playing on 4K HDR. I have a 4K HDR capable TV and monitor. And when I'm playing on either of them, I'm playing at 4K Ultra HD HDR. And so I don't know what this, criticizing it is all about. And I hear all the time saying it's a 1080p console. It's not. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, it's at 4K HDR. It's upscaled from 2K, but it is 4K. You won't be able to tell the difference. Here I'm going to leave you with some videos.
No one should buy a Series S.
You can only go up to 1440p gaming. So you don't have no true 4K gaming here. So you can stream 4K, but you can't play 4K games. And, if you have a 1080p TV, this is fine. But if you have a 4K TV, just don't do it to yourself. Get yourself the Xbox Series X or the PlayStation 5.
From close up, the breath effect looks really pixelated and kind of crappy, but from here, it doesn't make a difference. Honestly, from here, I'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between the two of them.
But if you have a 4K TV, just don't do it to yourself. Get yourself the Xbox Series X.
I'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between the two of them.
If you can save up the other $200, absolutely you're getting a console that's 3 times as powerful.
Assassin's Creed Valhalla has this feature where you can use your bird to scout and place markers and stuff like that. And what we noticed when playing around with it is, watch this. On the S, there is some pretty serious texture pop in. Let's try the same thing on the X. And yep, wow. Still terrible.
3 times as powerful.
Yep, still terrible. Okay, well that's rough.
And I do know that the Xbox Series X has better graphics. I mean, it has 12 teraflops compared to 4, but it's not going to be a difference that's going to be huge for an average, gamer to actually, tell the difference. It is a difference, and you will be able to play at native 4K, but you're able to play at 4K upscaled from 2K in the Xbox Series S. So while there is a difference, it isn't huge.
Or at least better resolutions. But now Microsoft wants to sell you an Xbox that plays games at 1440p at 60 frames per second, although I kind of think it's probably going to be 1080p at 60 frames per second, if we're going to be completely frank.
I'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference between the two of them.
And I want to say that I do admire GameRanks. You know, I do like his channel, I love his content, and he is right in almost everything that he talks about. But in this case, I do believe that he's not right, and that while it is true that it's a 1440p that can upscale to 2K, the only time that you will be playing at 1080p is when you're playing at 120 FPS. So I think that's not a reasonable comparison to make between the X and the S.
Frank, whatever it ends up actually being, isn't that kind of a step back? I mean, we were talking about 4K and 6 teraflops, and now we're talking 1440p and 4 teraflops. First off, I think it's important to note that we're talking a lot about marketing.
So here he's going to explain, further the difference between teraflops and actual usage. And I do like that he makes it very clear that it's not really a good comparison to make.
To be frank, it's not just about raw numbers, but how those numbers work. What is the input-output pipeline? How fast can data be transferred? What is the bottleneck? In order to make that make sense, let's talk a little bit about teraflops. They're not really a good measurement to compare between different architectures, like the Xbox architecture and the PlayStation architecture. Now, from a hardware perspective, they're both x86 machines. However, understanding that the actual software base that both of these things are running on is significantly different and manipulate data differently, just talking about raw numbers isn't actually useful because chipsets, technology, and data pipelines are all complex and proprietary, especially this generation, where the promise that the PlayStation brings is a total revolution in data transfer. And second, at this point, resolution just doesn't really matter a lot. Like, we are talking relatively, to be completely clear. If you put out like a 640 by 480 game and tried to claim it was HD, that would matter. But aside from intentional aesthetics, nobody's really doing that kind of resolution anymore. Hell, nobody's even doing 720p. Like, if you put out a game in 720p at this point, people would be like, okay, why'd you do that? However, if you play on PC, you probably know that being able to run the game smoothly with visual fidelity, effects, shaders, textures, all that stuff on a resolution that is at least 1080p is more about balance, and having a package that runs smoothly is much better than having something that runs at 8K and has all the effects turned off. Given the choice between that and 1080p, 60 frames per second, everything turned on, yeah, duh. It's not even competition in my head. PC gamers are often making purchase decisions like graphics cards, RAM, etc., based on monitor resolution as opposed to highest resolution they can get. Like, you want to attain a certain visual performance at the quality that your monitor can put out, whether that be 1080p, 1440p, or even 4K. I mean, if you're willing to spend a lot of money, you can get good performance on 4K. It's not like you can. And to be frank, with new technologies emerging, it's getting better all the time. But it's the scalability of PC gaming that provides this flexibility. And this is also why developers make sure that something runs at a lot of different resolutions. Resolution is just the size of the canvas your console is going to render out. It's a number of pixels that are a certain density, and it takes more work to draw this on a 4K size canvas, which has a lot more pixels packed into a lot less space than on a 1440p or a smaller 1080p one. Keeping this in mind, the Xbox Series X is the 4K version, and the S is the 1080p/1440p, maybe slightly wishful thinking on that second number, version.
So that adds to my point that the teraflops that the console has, it's not a really good marker to tell actually how good the graphics are going to be. But I do want to stress that it's always going to be better graphics on the Series X because it runs at a native 4K. But like I said, like 4 times in the video, it's not something that you and me, the average consumer, is going to notice. Where you are going to notice a difference, it's when you're running backwards compatible games. They are going to run much, much better on the Series X. If you want to play loads of old gen games, Xbox 360, original Xbox, then you're better off buying the Xbox Series X.
While we're up here in the sky, we've got a good opportunity to have a look at draw distance. So just because close-up objects look very close between the two of them doesn't mean that far-away objects will have as much detail on the Series S. Seems fine, honestly.
If there's a difference at all, it kind of looks like on the S that there's just like more atmosphere between you and those far mountains.
Yeah.
Just a little fuzzier.
This is the X, and immediately I'm noticing a lot of the same things I noticed last time I played around with the X. Like, this thing is pretty flippin' smooth. Now this is where I'm expecting the difference in teraflops to hurt the S a little bit. Let's try and fight some dude. Oh, hey, wow. Yeah, that chug is immediately noticeable. And remember, this is in spite of the fact that it renders at a lower resolution and upscales it. Let's try some more games. This is interesting. The similarity in image quality between the two consoles in Assassin's Creed Valhalla might just come down to a ton of optimization from Ubisoft.
When are we kind of done?
Now.
20 seconds.
20 seconds. Okay. I'm not really expecting this to be any different. 3, 2, 1, go. Because the storage of the systems is rated at the same speeds, but there still could be some because the CPU, even though it's still 8 cores, is slightly slower in the Series S. And actually, the GDDR6 memory that also acts as system RAM is slower as well, so maybe. All right, 20 seconds for both. No appreciable difference. Now let's do a game launch. 3, 2, 1, go. For this, I actually don't want to just go until the game menu. So I'm going to go through it as fast as I can to jump into game, but I want to actually load into a level. Continue. And there we go.
Minute 5.
Minute and 5. That's it. A minute to be gaming. 3, 2, 1. That actually did feel a little faster.
Only 4 seconds faster.
4 seconds faster. That is faster, but in either case, you're gonna be up and gaming in a matter of about a minute, assuming that you didn't fully power off your console. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. You're away from the Series S. You're basically getting a last-gen console if you do.
That's the kind of thing that, I mean, if there was an advantage one way or the other, that would be a much bigger difference maker to me than, you know, slightly sharper details.